I want to help you get clear on how you can get pain-free for Christmas without another failed physio appointment. So in this episode, I want to tell you about our client Jake. So Jake came to us last year around the start of November, about 6 weeks out from Christmas, and he managed to get pain-free for Christmas and actually managed to get back to football as well after having an ankle pain and injury for 13 weeks. He had been stuck in that cycle of injury, rehab, returning to sport, injury for 13 weeks. He'd been going round and round and spinning his wheels. So I really hope that from this podcast episode you can get some clarity on how you can get pain-free for Christmas this year too, so you're not going into the new year with your injury or your pain still plaguing you. So to get started, I just want to talk through the sort of 1 to 3 big problems, if you like, that was the reason as to why Jake was stuck in this injury cycle. And probably the reasons why you're stuck in this injury cycle too. And most of these are to do with the type of physio that Jake was receiving at the time. See, Jake had tried physio, he had been to multiple physios, he had multiple pieces of advice, he'd done his own research online, and he had done his rehab. He was a really, really good patient. He had done his exercises, he kept himself accountable to them, and yet every single time he went to run, he was still experiencing pain in his ankle. And the first problem for Jake was that all of his rehab was based around symptom management. Now, what I mean by that is sometimes I look at this as like the 80% and the 20%. So if we think of a knee, or in Jake's example actually, if we think of his ankle, he was having pain, literal pain in his ankle, and he could feel pain on certain movements, and more importantly for him, he could feel pain whenever he ran and whenever he played football. To me and to the physios in Rebuild, that is the 20%. Those symptoms are 20% of the problem. The other 80% of the problem is the reason as to why that pain has been there in the first place. The reason as to why there is compensation patterns and all of these different things, and that's what we call the root cause of the pain. And all of Jake's physio to date had been really focused on the 20%, had been very much focused on his symptoms, giving him maybe tape, giving him stretches, giving him mobility drills, giving him hands-on therapy to try to solve the symptoms, rather than looking at the other 80%, which is actually solving it at source and finding the root cause. The second problem that we identified whenever we chatted to Jake about his previous treatment and what he'd been doing so far were these time-based treatment plans. So Jake was going through session-based physiotherapy. You know, he'd maybe had 1 to 6 sessions of physio, and his progress was very much supposed to be determined on the sessions. So he was meant to move from phase to phase or from stage to stage or progress through his exercises completely based on the physio's availability and on Jake's availability. So that meant that if Jake had an appointment that was 3 weeks away from the appointment before, you're expecting, and he was expecting, his body and his ankle to heal and progress and adapt at the rate of that calendar, essentially at the speed of that calendar at that time. That's what I'm referring to as time-based treatment plans. And these scientifically don't work because you're completely determining the healing factors and the adaptations of your tissues on someone's calendar and diary, rather than basing that off objective benchmarks and measures and testing and retesting, knowing that you're only moving on to the next stage when you're ready. And that might mean that your treatment plan is shorter or longer, it just depends, but it's based off science, it's based off healing, and it's actually based off the adaptation in the tissues, and that is tested objectively so that you know that you're ready to move on at the right time. And the third problem that we saw with Jake is that he had no clear roadmap to his goal, and that last part of the sentence is really, really important. To his goal was to run, and his goal was to play football, and he had no clear roadmap to that. Whenever I asked him about, have the physio chatted around sort of why you're not there yet, or what the next steps are to get you to that goal, he didn't have a clue. He had just been doing random exercises, just doing what he's told, but he didn't actually have a clear roadmap of how he was going to actually get right up to his goal. And these 3 things, symptom management type plans, time-based times, and no clear roadmap in people's plans, are the sort of 3 things that we see time and time again in sort of more traditional physio, and they're really the root cause of the problem when it comes to people being stuck in a rut or feel like they're spinning their wheels with their rehab, or being stuck in that injury re-injury cycle and never quite reaching their goal with full confidence because of these 3 main issues. So what we did for Jake, and what we really want to advise you as well, is we took these 3 problems and we sort of picked them apart. So for Jake, the first thing was that symptom management. So we needed to actually look at the 80%. So yes, deal with his symptoms. Yes, give him things that were going to reduce his pain down, of course, in the short term, but actually pick apart that long term. And that all came from his baseline assessment. So for Jake, we were able to delve in. We were able to see what sort of compensations had occurred. We were able to see what injury had happened in the first place. We were able to identify what movement patterns had been altered as a result of this injury, but also what were Jake's movement habits like even before the injury. And we were able to see as well, or determine specific strength tests for Jake to make sure that we were able to test him for the sort of load demands off running and the load demands off his goals. So we were able to do this really nice comprehensive assessment for Jake and pull across the right adequate data to give us a nice baseline for where he was at to begin with. And then from there, we were able to build on filling in the gaps, filling in the foundations, and actually building him up to his goal, and actually taking him through a plan that was going to help him not just from a symptom management point of view, but actually solve the root cause at its source. And that was completely determined by his baseline assessment. And then to combat the time-based treatment plans that Jake had been given, we were completely working off objective data, and that data started with his baseline assessment. Jake was only allowed to move on to phase 2 once he had completed his baseline testing measures, and he'd hit the measures that we require and we see as safe, and then we can move him into the next stage. He worked through phase 2 and phase 3, and then he did another bout of testing, which was his functional movement testing. That took him into phase 4, where he was then finally allowed to look at plyometrics. He was able to look at those sort of load demands that are really involved with running, and then he was safe, and we were able to retest his functional movement testing, and whenever that was all ticked off, he was allowed to return to his goal. And that's whenever we started to introduce Jake back to running, and that's whenever Jake was pain-free and back to football training by Christmas last year. And that's when then we could look at that bigger roadmap as well. So as we said, that was another problem that we saw Jake had with his previous treatment plans, is there was no clear roadmap around his goal. So Jake was at the stage now where, yes, he was able to play football, but we needed to make sure that he was going to be confident with contact in a match. We were going to need to make sure that he could change direction quickly, he could work under fatigue. And Jake's big goal was to actually run the Belfast Marathon in May in the new year, so May 25 just passed. So that was us then able to build out that clear roadmap. We've got Jake through that first stage where he was pain-free, and now it's actually, right, okay, Jake, how can we make sure that we reduce your injury risk, we bring you back stronger than you were before, and we make sure that you can achieve these big performance goals. And that's exactly what Jake did. Jake then went on and ran his first ever marathon in the Belfast Marathon last year and completed a full season of football as well. So you might be wondering from this, well, what can you do, or what can you take away from this? And hopefully even just maybe recognizing maybe those 3 problems, or one of those problems is maybe the reason why you're stuck in your injury cycle, can be really, really helpful. And understanding sort of how you can get clarity on that, and how you can actually get a plan that's going to help to identify the root cause and be completely based around your goals. So hopefully even just understanding that will be really, really helpful for you. But something sort of more productive that you can also be doing in this time is really start to track your symptoms. This is a tool we used with Jake quite early on, and because he'd been having the pain for a pretty long period of time, and there didn't seem to be much clarity on exactly what was causing the pain or why it was sore at certain times, we got Jake to keep a little bit of a track of his symptoms and let us know when they were sore. So I'd really recommend even pulling up a note on your phone and just tracking along with your symptoms. Maybe when your ankles maybe feeling stiff, it's your ankle, or if it's your knee or your back or your hip, or maybe when you've got more of a sharper pain. Determining what type of pain you have is really important to begin with. So Jake had sort of like a stiffness type pain, but he also had sharp pains at times. So we were able to track those symptoms and actually pair them up then with certain activities, and then address those activities as he went on. So tracking your symptoms is going to be really, really helpful. And it's a really good thing to give you a place in terms of where to start in terms of addressing then the cause of your symptoms. And then if you want to find out more about how you can actually identify that root cause and how you can actually get a plan that's going to take you from where you are now to being pain-free at Christmas, we've actually recorded a free 20-minute webinar which is going to walk you through the exact steps that you need to take in order to get pain-free for Christmas and beyond, just like Jake did last year. So you can download that in the description below. It's completely free. You can also drop me a message on Instagram and I can send it over to you. As I said, it's completely free, and we just hope that it'll get you one step closer to getting pain-free for this Christmas. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you do have any questions at all, just drop me a message on Instagram and I'd be happy to have a chat and hopefully help you get pain-free.